Hey, and welcome to Eat Out at Home, the podcast. This is the place for those with exquisite taste who are on a mission to cook better, eat healthier, dine together, and add some gourmet to their everyday. I'm your host, Chef Evelyn, and on this podcast, we talk about all things food, cooking, baking, and entertaining as I share stories from my well-seasoned career as a professional chef for over 20 years. So if that sounds tempting to your taste buds, grab a snack, sit back, relax, and let's dive in. Hey, and welcome back to another episode of Eat Out at Home, the podcast. I'm your host, Chef Evelyn, and in this episode, I kind of want to get a little bit personal, maybe in the next couple of episodes, which is something, I usually shy away from on the internet, social media. I kind of save things for, in real life with, people and professionals that I share personal things with. But this is, I think, something that I want to share. I think will be beneficial. I think will answer the question why I stopped podcasting, why I stopped creating food content, why I stopped offering any and all culinary products and services. So, I titled this episode, Why I Stopped Cooking for 7 Years, and I definitely want to expound upon that. So basically, it is what it is. I basically stopped cooking for 7 years, and it's not that I never cooked at all. Obviously, I cooked a little bit more during the pandemic, but for the most part, my cooking dwindled to almost nothing. And it started in 2016 when I was diagnosed with cancer. And when I was diagnosed with cancer, I'm not going to go into a lot of that because I am happy that season of my life is over, that I'm healthy, and everything is on the up and up. So I'm really excited about that. Life has been good. I'm so blessed to be on the other side of that. But in 2016, I was diagnosed with cancer, and I made the personal choice to go a holistic route for my healing. And one of the aspects of my holistic healing journey was, to significantly change my diet. And with that, particularly with that diagnosis, I was on an extremely restrictive diet. That's not necessarily meant for, to be long-term or meant to be, every day, but it was definitely meant for that season of my life. And I was miserable. If I'm being quite honest, I was so miserable. Obviously, the shock and the trauma of being diagnosed with a life-threatening illness, but then also, getting put on or choosing to allow myself to be put on this very, very restrictive diet. And, for me, I chose that over surgery and over, more traditional treatments. But nonetheless, even though I chose it, it still was very depressing for me. And so, there was kind of like a joke with my doctors, like, oh, you're a chef, this should make it easier. They weren't, negating the fact that this was going to be a challenging experience or a challenging journey, but they were like, you have the skills to make these things taste good, to make it delicious, all of that. The challenge is kind of like, I only had a very limited supply of things that I could work with, right? And there were some things that were actually detrimental to me that if I consumed them, that would derail my process and in my healing journey. And so if you can imagine, I'm someone who loves food. I left my chemical and environmental engineering career to pursue my passion for food, to go to culinary school, to be a professional chef, to, offer cooking classes and personal chef services and create content and do all these things. So imagine not only having this diagnosis, but then being told like the thing that you love the most, the thing that brings you the most joy is like under extreme restriction, right? In order to bring you back to full health. And it literally was like having on a culinary straitjacket. There were so many things that I couldn't eat, I couldn't use, I couldn't consume. And, I remember thinking, I can do this, right? I remember thinking, I've got the skills, I can do this. And I remember walking into Whole Foods, not a shocker there. One, I love Whole Foods in general, but particularly during this time, Whole Foods was like the place to go for me. And I remember getting into the store, standing there in the aisle looking around and just became overwhelmed with grief. And it brought me to tears, that I was like in tears in Whole Foods, because in my mind, I was like, there's nothing in here for me to eat. I remember thinking all the things that I want to try, even in a healthy store like Whole Foods, all these things that I want to try, all these things I want to experiment with, all these ideas in my head. I cannot do that. And, there is this term called orthorexia. And while I do not know if I technically had orthorexia, because orthorexia has not been officially accepted into like the therapy DSM-5, I believe is what it's called, kind of like anorexia. But orthorexia basically, if I remember correctly, is a condition where someone is over concerned with the consumption of healthy foods to the point that it's like depressive. It completely alters their lifestyle. They can't be sociable. They won't eat anything that falls outside of parameters of what they deem healthy. And so while I don't know for sure if that was my experience, when I read all the symptoms about orthorexia, it definitely felt like that is what I had experienced. And so to me, it cut even further deep, because this was not just, oh, okay, I'm a person and now I'm on this really restrictive diet and I'm having these symptoms of orthorexia. It was like, I'm a chef who loves food and you've snatched my love from me. And so it didn't happen overnight. Obviously, during that time, I was cooking at home. It was the only way that I could satisfy my dietary requirements and the nutrition plan that I was on. And so I remember going through that and then eventually coming out and being on the clear. And then slowly over time, I was just uninspired to cook. It started with the baking. Obviously, sugar and carbs were not a part of the nutrition plan that I was on when I was diagnosed with cancer, because there are some medical studies that have said that, cancer feeds off of sugar, whether that is artificial sugar, alternative sugar, other sweeteners, white sugar, brown sugar, powdered sugar, or even sugar from fruits and sugar from carbohydrates, right? So obviously baking, which was my first culinary love, was completely off the picture. So that entire category went away. There was no baking of any kind. There were no carbs of any kind. And there were only dark berries, so blueberries, raspberries, blackberries, strawberries. At that time, no cherries, because cherries were a little too sweet, and then no other fruits because they were too sweet. So not only did I not get to enjoy anything sweet during that time, but I carried that mindset with me even after I was in the clear of being cancer free. And then there was just a lot of other things that were on this, they were part of this nutrition plan. And what I think my food soul, if you will, my culinary soul started like dying a slow death. I mean, I'm not trying to be dramatic, but I think that's what was happening. And in retrospect, I didn't see it happening. It wasn't like a drastic change. It was a gradual, like just letting go. And the mindset that I had was, I can't really cook what I want, so I'm not going to cook at all. But the challenge is I still have to eat, right? So, it starts dwindling and I start cooking less and less and less. And I think I got to the point where I literally was just eating like salad and chicken, like weeks on, like months and months at a time, right? Just bored to death. But I was just eating chicken and salad, chicken and salad, chicken and salad. Maybe I would change up the vegetable occasionally, but that's all that was happening, right? Because I had given up pork before that. I also was not consuming red meat at that time, and I'm not a big crustacean fan. I do like fish. I don't like crustaceans. So you can imagine, well, no red meat. So there's no beef, there's no venison, there's no lamb, there's no bison, there's no red meat. And it was like chicken, occasional turkey, sometimes fish. And I was just like, this is no way to live. I was so miserable. So fast forward and we hit the pandemic, and obviously At that point, it was less about passion and more about survival. It was just like, I've got to cook at home because the world is shut down. So there was like this blip in the timeline where I was cooking at home more, and I kind of let go of all of those rules. And so for a brief moment, I was cooking whatever I wanted. I didn't care about the carbs. I didn't care about the sugar. I didn't care about the red meat. I just was like, kind of probably overwhelmed, like the rest of the world was like, we don't know what this is. The entire world is locked into their homes. I needed an outlet for the stress that I think I was experiencing during that time. And so I was kind of cooking any and everything. But as the world started opening up and that pressure to have to cook at home, the pressure to have to, like be restricted was lifted, the symptoms, I can't say that I had orthorexia, but the symptoms of the orthorexia came back because there was no longer the reason or the excuse like over in a pandemic and I have to cook for survival. Now it's all the options are back open to me and I can be back on this meal plan, even though by that time I knew that I was cancer free. So the world begins to open up, and I will really tell you, this is probably when the stuff really hit the fan, and I just kind of went like down a spiral of like not cooking at home. And I don't even think I know I didn't make a conscious decision to be like, I'm not going to cook, I'm going to eat out. But it just turned into like hardly keeping anything in my freezer, hardly keeping anything in my pantry, going periods of time without eating and then ended up being ravenous. And because I'm ravenous now, I just need to order something. And I'm ordering something, but it's not the healthiest. And like this vicious cycle, right? And then even when I would be like, okay, I need to grocery shop and I need to cook at home, I was doing what a lot of people do. The vegetables were going bad and I claimed I was going to cook it. And then I defrosted something and I let it go too long. And then I wasn't making time to cook. And so, or taking time from my schedule to cook. And so again, now I had groceries that were going bad and, but I wasn't cooking them. And because then I would get ravenous, I would have to eat out. And I looked up and I realized that I had put myself in an unhealthier state post my cancer diagnosis than when I had my cancer diagnosis. And it was a bit of a wake up call for me. I didn't have another cancer diagnosis, but I just was like, how do you feel and how are you unhealthier now than you were when you were diagnosed with cancer? And it's because before that, I was cooking all the time. Even before I was cooking all the time. And before the cancer diagnosis, I was running a cooking school and we were, I was managing that and we had different classes every day. And so I was sampling different things every day and life was just interesting and enjoyable when it comes to food. And so I realized like, I kept trying to go on these like diets, like you need to cut out all carbs. You need to cut out all sugar. You need to cut out all of this, right? And it was like a yo-yo. I wouldn't stick to it. And then it would be like, you need to go on a 40-day fast or you need to go on a 90-day fast. These extreme things that I was trying to kind of loop myself back into a healthier eating lifestyle. And one day I sat down and I was like, how was I eating before, right? Before the pandemic, before I was eating out all the time, before the cancer diagnosis. And I was like, I was actually a pretty healthy eater when I didn't have all these rules. And so I got really quiet. And for me, quiet time also includes prayer. And I was just like, what's the most enjoyable way for me to get back on track? Because, I don't want to keep going down this path. And, I started to miss the art and the practice of cooking. And so basically, the answer that I got was forget all the rules, forget all the restrictions, just focus on eating your meals at home. It doesn't matter what you eat, right? Take all the limits off. Just focus on cooking at home. And so I started down this path of it's like, I just want to eat 6 out of 7 days the week, all of my meals at home. And obviously that forced me to cook, but it allowed me to cook without restriction, right? So if there was carbs, there was carbs. If there was red meat, there was red meat. If there was butter and cream and cheese, I did it, which is interesting because I actually don't, my natural cooking style is actually not unhealthy. So I didn't even go overboard in any of those areas, but it was just nice to spark the flame of enjoying to cook. And so I did that for, a couple of months. And then, the next phase was like, now let's just focus on incorporating things and about just like making sure that I have something green every day, making sure that I have some color of fruit every day, and a vegetable at every meal, right? Just making sure I'm taking my supplements, things like that. And I'm a couple of months into that. And I will tell you, and so that kind of makes up the like 6 to 8 months of, getting back to cooking. And I will tell you, I feel great. I feel great. And I mean, there's so many benefits to eating out at home. I don't have to tell you how much money you save, how much healthier it is. Even if you're like frying chicken at home, okay, it's going to be healthier than the fried chicken that you get when you eat out. I'm not, advocating that you fry chicken every day. But what I'm saying is, because you get to pick the ingredients, because there's not all the extra chemicals and preservatives and things like that. If you're making food from scratch, I'm not necessarily talking about prepackaged food that you just heat and eat, you're already going to be healthier than eating out. And I'm not anti-eating out. Listen, I love restaurants. I love trying new things, but I love them when I'm intentionally choosing to go out to them, to meet up with people, to socialize, to have an experience, to celebrate something, not going to the place around the corner that's kind of okay, maybe a little bit overpriced just because I didn't cook today, right? And I'm going to do a whole episode about kind of like my, next steps in the process, as far as, okay, now that I've spent a couple months focused on just cooking at home and, more recently, really just focusing on what I like to call offensive eating, right, versus defensive eating. It's like, what am I going to incorporate versus what am I going to eliminate? And then I'll share in that other episode kind of like what's coming next. But that's really what kept me from cooking for 7 years. So from 2016 up until about 6 to 8 months ago, I really hadn't cooked anything, worth mentioning, that really leaned into my culinary ability and my culinary experience and training. And it's also why I stopped podcasting, right? Because the love wasn't there, the passion wasn't there. But I hope you can hear that it's back. I'm excited. There's things that I look forward to creating. There's recipes that I look forward to trying. My interest in cookbooks is peaking up again, and I want to share some of those things with you as well. So I know this is a little bit of a longer episode. I kind of talked it all the way through. No notes, no scripts. But I really wanted to share with you that, if you're someone who's had a similar experience, or somebody that's had a similar experience, or you just feel, frustrated. I think I have an older episode called Gourmet Grief, not even realizing at the time that that's exactly what I was experiencing, that there's hope on the other side, and you can get back to your love of food. And even if, you are on a nutrition plan that has guardrails, is what I like to call them, right? That has parameters, right? That you can still find love there, because I'm still, not eating a ton of carbs, right? I'm not on zero carbs at that time. I was on like zero carbs. But I'm back to the person who I already cooked with alternative sweeteners. I hadn't been a white sugar person in a long time unless I'm baking. I'm already somebody that has a very relatively low dairy intake lifestyle, right? I'm also a person who doesn't consume pork or crustaceans. So I was like, a lot of, I already have alternative salts and things like that. I was like, so I'm already a person who I meet most of the food, quote unquote, recommendations, regardless of what diet you're talking about. I pretty much fall into that. I'm very whole foods focused, I don't have a lot of processed food in my kitchen, and shout out to, there's a vlogger, by the name of Tony Daly, and she coined the phrase, she has an ingredient kitchen, meaning if you come over to my house, I don't necessarily have snacks, right? But I do have lots of ingredients. And so anything that I want to eat has to be made from scratch. And that's kind of how I like it. I don't have a lot of like heat and eat meals or heat and eat snacks or things like that. So, anyway, I just wanted to share that backstory. Hopefully you are excited to be back on the podcast. It's not going to all be about me, but I just wanted to share that story to be like, that's why I've been gone. And here's why I'm back. And here's what you can look forward to. So in the upcoming episodes, I'm just going to be sharing a few more personal episodes about how I'm getting back on track, how I'm preparing my kitchen, from like what equipment I'm going to be purchasing to how I'm going to prepare my freezer, my fridge, my pantry, how I'm shopping now in this phase of life, how I'm getting, how I'm eating out at home, how I'm really mastering eating 6 out of the 7 days a week of my meals at home and things like that. And especially now with a very active lifestyle. So if you follow me on Instagram at Chef Evelyn, you may know that over these past couple of years, I've picked up boxing as a physical hobby as well as dance. So ballet, jazz, and modern, specifically Horton technique. And so also how I'm eating now with a very, very physically active lifestyle. So with that being said, I'm going to be sharing all things and so much more, right? And I hope you tune in. I hope you share this podcast with a friend or a family member or a coworker or someone that you know that could benefit. And we'll chat in the next episode. Bye-bye. If you're enjoying this podcast, make sure to head on over to Apple Podcasts and leave it a review. And if you're curious about what I'm cooking in between episodes, make sure to stay connected with me on YouTube, Instagram, and TikTok, where I'm sharing delicious behind-the-scenes grocery hauls, recipe inspiration, food for thought, and so much more. I'll see you in the next episode.